Welcome to the Hot Cage podcast presented by CageWall.com. This is the episode for March 1st, 2013. On this episode, the subject we will discuss will include, but are not limited to, Ronda Rousey signing with a major Hollywood studio and getting a movie offer, the Henderson brothers' desire to fight at different weights, and the preview of all the fights we feel are relevant from UFC on Fuel TV 8. First things first, let me welcome in my tag team partner, as always, TJ Craig. TJ, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great, John. How's it going?
It's going fantastic, man. The train keeps moving, as we say every week. There's more fights again. This could be a very... I'll get to this a little bit later, but I think this could be a historic weekend. I certainly hope it's a historic weekend for my own selfish purposes, because hopefully this could be the end of an era, and I hope it ends properly. But anyway, let's jump right into the flurry. This week, the flurry is presented, as always, as the rest of the podcast is, by CageWall.com. Go to CageWall, check out all the news, the notes. You and I are going to become contributing members of CageWall. Start putting more of our content up there. I put an article about Ronda Rousey up there, and you have some articles that are in the hopper that'll be up there before too long. So anyway, folks, get to CageWall. We're going to make this site huge and see some great content. All right, let's get started. First up, we're going to go ahead and recap Tough 17. It was a interesting episode, to say the least. Josh Saman faced Thor Troing, and it was kind of a surprise to me because Josh had complained about some injuries recently, and I kind of thought the fight was going to be a little bit closer. In the pre-fight, in the early stages of the Tough 17 show, they were kind of saying that Thor was probably one of the tougher guys in the show. He's quiet. You know how quiet guys go. They talked about that on the show as well. What'd you think about this episode of Tough 17?
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty good episode. Nobody really knew much about Thor. I mean, they thought he was going to be one of the tougher guys in there, but nobody even really knew what he was about, what kind of game he had, or anything like that. I mean, the show it is what it is, right? You have some mumbling in the house, back and forth pranks, the same old. But I thought when it came down to the fight, I thought it was going to be a lot closer than it was. Thor just seemed like he couldn't start his game plan and kind of implement anything. It was against Cage. There was a lot of holding, and then they would back up and throw punches. But ultimately, in the end, just like you say at the end of our show, what do you say? Keep your hands up and your chin down. Well, homeboy dropped his hands and got knocked out. So it was a pretty good matchup, but I think everybody was expecting a little bit more out of Thor.
Yeah, he definitely did. He dropped his hands and caught a quick two-piece that ended the night for him. He got the Thor hammer right upside his head. And so now, it's one of these things that's weird. We think we got the whole thing figured out. It's a foregone conclusion that Uriah Hall is the finalist, so we think. And then, everybody thinks that they're kind of complaining about Josh and the way he conducts himself. He's kind of cocky. He's, a father figure and puts his 2 cents into everything. But then he goes in and looks really impressive in the cage, and now he looks like he's a force to be reckoned with.
Right.
The way he looked against Thor, he looks like he's game enough to stand in there with Hall, right? I mean, Hall was very impressive, but it was against Adam Sella, who's no Josh Saman. So, I mean, it starts to get more interesting when you see the guys, the guys fight, right?
Josh is a gamer. I mean, he is. He talks a lot. He likes to bring forward. I think he is a little cocky. But hey, when you're in the fight game, if you don't believe in yourself, who are you supposed to believe in? And there's a fine line you can walk without an attitude and believing in yourself. And I think he walks that line very tightly. But after the fight with Thor, he looks like he could be a gamer standing there with Uriah Hall. So that'd be interesting. And it's funny though, during the show too, Uriah Hall was already calling out team members, and that's already putting kind of a feud inside their own team. So it's going to be interesting, man, how the next few weeks plays out.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I wanted to get to next. What are your thoughts on Uriah Hall and the way he's conducting himself? Because it does seem like he's alienating his teammates. It does seem like, but now it also kind of, as you notice, was an opportunity for him to get a little more focused on what he was doing. So when no one was really talking with him and he was like, I don't really feel like hanging out with anybody, I'm just doing my own thing. As you'll notice, he was going running, He was putting work in. So is it kind of a calculated maneuver on Hall's part to say, well, I don't really want to have any friends leaving this experience. I just want to. My job is to get into the UFC, and the more focused I can get on that goal, and the less distractions I have, the better. Is that what you think he's trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably partially of it. And like during the show, they were talking about how bad he wanted to be on John Jones' team. He's been hanging out with John Jones' teammates in the house, so he's kind of like positioned himself against his team, but yet everybody knows that he really wanted John Jones, and he didn't get that. So he's positioned himself. If he doesn't want to make friends, so be it. Uh, you got to stay focused. And I mean, when you're in the house, it's obviously you're there for a while, and you're going to get close to some people. I would think it's like me and you being in the military. When you're locked up with a bunch of males, eventually you're going to come and talk to them and become friends with most of them or some of them. So it's hard to see that he doesn't want friends with this. It's almost like human nature to become friends when you're stuck like that in a position like that. So I don't know what his true game plan is, but he's playing the game.
Well, and it became curious as well because he was talking about how he was bullied and he felt he says whenever I feel like I'm getting bullied, I go right back to that place. But
Right.
then he was kind of acting like a bully. So it was a weird situation. He's a very curious guy. He's a hell of a fighter, and the thing that's interesting about a guy like him is that not all fighters, but a lot of fighters can be this way because we're not subjected to this aspect of their lives. They'll video blog, but it's
Right.
it's very carefully edited and it's put out there what they want. Uriah Hall's even come out since then and said, didn't really go down the way they said it because he was kind of alienating Jones's team as well. So who knows? I mean, at this point, we just got to focus on the fact that he's a hell of a fighter and kind of leave, I guess, the rest of the shit.
Yeah, we'll see.
As
We'll
you,
see.
it is what it is. It's reality TV. So, all right,
That's right.
moving on. Ronda Rousey has signed with the William Morris Agency and also got a movie. She was offered a movie role. So it looks like we finally found a fitting opponent for Ronda Rousey. It's Katniss Everdeen. She's going to be in next Hunger Games potentially. So maybe that's the only person that can take Ronda out. Who knows? But what do you think this means for her future as a fighter? And is this good or bad?
I think with this stage in her career, I think it's a bad move. If we saw her all through up into the Carmouche fight, and how she wants to take on all comers. This is what she was meant to do: to be a fighter, to be a champion, to beat everybody that they put in front of her, and go out and look for more people to beat. And then she flips the script and signs with a movie deal. Uh, it's almost like a Gina Carano move, right? And it's earlier in the career. It's you're basing it off of something. You're riding the wave of being the first UFC women's champion. So I don't know. I think ultimately it could be a bad thing because she's got to position herself of if she's doing this movie, when is she going to work out? When is she going to have time to fight? What's the money going to be worth? And then if she screws up and loses that title, everything's going to be flushed down the toilet. So I think ultimately you got to figure out this early in your career what you really want to do and how you want to pursue it.
Well, I would say the difference between the two situations is Gina Carano took her movie on the heels of a loss. She lost to Santos, so that's part of it. Rampage, same thing. Rousey would be the only person, as of yet, who took a movie role in the prime of her career. Even Rampage. Rampage wasn't the best fighter in his division when he took the 18. And Carano certainly wasn't the best women's fighter when she took the Haywire movie or anything else she's been in. Fast and Furious, I think she's in that too, or she's in that coming up. But yeah, we lost her to the movies, and we kind of, in a sense, lost Rampage to the movies. So Dana White says that, and he said this with Rampage, so he's at least had some consistency, is that her true money, where her true money is going to be made, is in the octagon. So I think he wants that to remain her focus, and as do most people. But it's one of those double-edged swords, and I'll probably be writing something about this for Cage Wall this week because it's something that's intriguing to me. It's kind of a careful what you wish for situation. If you're Dana White, you want exposure, but then if that exposure then leads to you losing fighters to movies, well, if you're Dana White, would you just assume nobody did movies, or would you want the exposure of your fighters doing movies? Because Hunger Games in fairness to both, what Gina Carano's doing is a different situation because I don't believe those were once in a lifetime roles. But in fairness to what Ronda Rousey might do and what Rampage did, I mean, Rampage is a perfect fit to be a Baracus, and Rousey is a perfect fit to be on the Hunger Games. So, I mean, those are really, truly once in a lifetime kind of perfect fit things. So, do you take that into account? Do you completely side with Dana and just think they should leave the movies alone, or what's your stance on that?
I think when you're that early in your career, I mean, uh, you have to do something after you fight. You can't fight forever. Right now, being that early in stage, Rampage is a different story. But with Ronda Rousey, I think to stay true to the game and what she really is focused on, I think she needs to stay focused on fighting because I think that's where the money's going to be made. I think she needs to build up the sport more. I mean, one fight's not going to build up WMMA. You know, the women need Ronda Rousey to ride this thing out and for other fighters to develop and come up through the UFC. And if she's blowing this all at one time, you know, it could hurt both her and the UFC.
I agree. Yeah, so we'll have to see how it plays out moving forward. You know, Dana usually gets his way, so we'll see. We'll see where it goes. Okay, up next we're going to talk about what I'm terming the Jose Aldo Anthony Pettis madness.
Madness, man, madness! I tell you.
Last week what we talked about was that Jose Aldo was refusing to fight Anthony Pettis because he felt like he didn't deserve a title. Interesting how that just turned into a negotiation. The latest is Jose Aldo is willing to fight Anthony Pettis, but feels that if he should win, he deserves an automatic shot at Ben Henderson, which is interesting because of what Ben Henderson thinks, which we'll get to in a sec. And then Anthony Pettis came back and said, well, that's fine. If I win, then I deserve a shot right at Ben Henderson. So answer this question for me. A, do either of them deserve shots at Ben Henderson should they win? And B, if you're Dana White, Joe Silva in the UFC, how do you handle this?
Well, Pettis already deserves a fight with Henderson, right? He's already right there. So absolutely, I think if he wins, then he gets the shot. Jose Aldo, I don't see why not either. I mean, Frankie Edgar dropped down in his weight class to fight, so if Aldo wins, why can't he jump up and take on Ben Henderson? So I think it's a good thing. Either one of those guys can fight at both weight classes. They're both champions in my book. So, yeah, I think both of them, if either one of them win, they can jump up and meet Henderson. Absolutely. And actually, I'd like to see both of them fight him. I think those two would be great fights. I think the Pettis and Aldo fight's going to be great, and whoever wins in that Henderson fight, I think that will be a great fight too. So it's like a triple win. It's you know, I'm a box score it like in horse races and shit because it's going to be tight. I think both of them can do it.
I agree. I'm really intrigued in it. I think it's a little crazy. I think it was a good move on Jose Aldo's part. It's kind of an Anderson.
Dude, that was smart. Don't mean to cut you off, but
no, go ahead.
I think that was intelligent of him. I think hell yeah, because I firmly believe that he can beat Pettis, and why not make more money than saying, okay, if you want me to fight Pettis, then fucking I get a shot at Ben Henderson. They're fucking double payday. Hell yeah, move up and take them. Well, he wanted to move up anyway, right? Eventually, he was going to move up. So why not? This is the best time as any. Is okay. I'm gonna go. If I win, I want to go out and fight the champion in Henderson. If I win, I'm the champion. I move up and fight him. So I thought it was brilliant. Actually, brilliant move.
I agree. I think it's kind of him saying, well, if you're gonna make me fight someone I don't want to fight, then at least reward me for it.
Right.
And at the same time, you're getting rewarded for your pay. But you're right. It was a very savvy move on his part, and it's kind of along the lines of some of the stuff that Anderson does. In terms of, Anderson will just ride out, and I'm sure behind the scenes he's angling for money or whatever he's doing because if you don't want to fight Chris Weidman, then you're gonna go say, hey, you get sweeten this deal. I don't want to fight Chris Weidman, so give me something of value to me. And now there's been talk of a John Jones and him fighting in a catchweight in New York, which I don't even want to get talking to that until I'm with Dana. I don't want to jinx this New York thing, so I don't really want to talk a whole hell of a lot about that. But now here's what makes the Aldo Pettis thing interesting. Is the first of the two Henderson boys we're going to talk about is Benson. And Benson's saying that if he should beat Gilbert Melendez, he wants to fight GSP at 170. Now, I'll skip to the end. Spoiler alert, Dana White says that ain't going to happen. So let me ask you your thoughts on that. If you're Ben Henderson, do you deserve to fight GSP at 170 as much as Aldo or Pettis deserve to fight you at 155?
I mean, this is the whole thing going back. If you're a champion and you can move up comfortably in a weight class, then I don't see why not going for the belt. If you think that you've cleared out or even beat the top contenders in your weight class, then absolutely go for it. Now, with Ben Henderson, I think he has a few more fights that he could put in the 155 weight class. I think there's a few fights, Pettis, Aldo. I mean, we could go on with a couple more, but absolutely, I think that with a couple more fights in that weight class, then sure, I think he can move up to 170 and get it just like he can. But I think there's still more to prove. I think he would want to put that Pettis thing, that famous kick, behind him, and get a rematch with that and clear up that on the record. But yeah, I don't see why not if he wants to move up and ask for it. There's no uh, there's nothing to say he can't ask for it.
Yeah, and I've long since thought that'd be a hell of a fight. I think Pettis and Henderson. He may be a few inches shorter than GSP. I'm not sure, but I think that he's right there. I mean, to me, he looks like a 70-pounder even at 155. He's built like that. He's got big, broad shoulders. He may be a little, you know how it is when you cut and then you have to you rehydrate to your walk around weight. So GSP probably fights at whatever it is, 180, 183. So I'm sure Ben probably fights around 170 when he's actually in the cage, maybe a little less. But I think it's the same situation as Jose Aldo. You got to. We're gonna get to this next topic, which is the other Henderson brother. But the reason why I bring up before we get to that, I want to talk about Dan Henderson has famously said, and it's been echoed by Muhammad Lawal, who was recently knocked out, is that what Dan Henderson used to say what he is I'm a money weight fighter. You want me to fight at 85, I'll fight at 85. You want me to fight at 205, I'll fight at 205. You want me to fight at heavyweight, I'll fight at heavyweight. I'm going to fight where the money is. I mean, the guy's fought Anderson Silva, Jake Shields, and Fedor Emelianenko. I mean, he's been all over the map. So he's going to go where the money is. So I think some of these guys are starting to wisen up and say, am I going to make as much money if I'm Ben Henderson fighting Anthony Pettis as I would fighting GSP?
Right.
Maybe not. So let's follow the money and make some money. Okay. Speaking of following the money and speaking of money weight fights, Dan Henderson has stated that he has an interest in fighting super fights at heavyweight. Like I said, he's fought Fedor Emelianenko before. He's fought some bigger weight guys in the past. So my question to you is, what do you think about him fighting Daniel Cormier at heavyweight? Should he defeat, or even at a catchweight, should Cormier defeat Frank Mir, and maybe on his way, maybe Henderson's on his way up to heavyweight, and Cormier's on his way down to light heavyweight, and then maybe they can meet in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what kind of super fights he's talking about, because if you're talking about Velasquez and all, these guys are weighing like 260, 265 right there on the brink of super heavyweight. So, I mean, I don't understand why he's saying a super fight. I mean, it'd be interested to see him fight maybe in some heavyweights, but I mean, when you're talking about champions and stuff, I just think the weight difference and stuff is going to be too much for him. But I do like, in saying that, I do like the fight with Daniel, because he's coming down. Daniel's trying to come down. So after the Frank Mir fight, let's see how he looks at the Frank Mir fight. Is he already dropping weight to get there? And if he is, I mean, I think that would be a good matchup for both of them.
I agree, and I guess the question becomes, like you said, who would you want to see him fight at heavyweight? I mean,
honestly, I don't want to see him fight anybody.
You wouldn't like to see him against Dos Santos?
No.
You think Dos Santos is too big for him?
Yeah, I think personally, yeah, I think Dos Santos is way too big for him. So I don't, off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head who I'd want to see him fight in heavyweight.
Well, but of course, obviously, if Cormier's on his way down, that'd be an interesting fight. I think that'd be a real interesting fight. They're both former Strikeforce fighters. I don't know, that when I heard Henderson having interest in fighting in heavyweight, and we know that Cormier has an interest in going down, I've thought that from the beginning. First time I saw it, I was like, Daniel Cormier. Okay, so moving on, let's get to GSP and Nick Diaz. GSP came out and said he doesn't like doing media any more than Nick Diaz does, and he doesn't understand why Nick Diaz gets away with not doing it and GSP doesn't. So I guess my question to you is not so much if Nick Diaz should have to do it or if GSP shouldn't. I mean, obviously, GSP's a victim of his own politeness, I guess. So the guy doesn't act like a maniac, and now he has to do something he doesn't want to do just because he's like, I'm not going to go out there and be an asshole like Nick Diaz. My question to you is, do you think that there should be something in place for fighters just so we don't have to scrap fights every time somebody doesn't play ball? Should they just fine fighters, UFC?
I mean, ultimately, I think that's what they're going to get to if you stop showing up at functions. Uh, that's what they'll do. I'm sure they're going to find people. What interested in that took me back was that GSP said that because, I mean, GSP is doing commercial promotions, for sponsors. I mean, you don't see Diaz doing that. And I don't even know if Diaz would probably even do that if you asked him to. So him saying that he doesn't like the publicity or doesn't like doing this stuff, it's if you don't like doing it, then why are you doing all these promotions and commercials and everything else? So that kind of took me back. But yeah, to your point, yeah, I think ultimately they're probably going to start finding fighters who don't show up at press conferences or do tapings that they need to do for the UFC or any other affiliation. So that's where it's going to get to. Diaz is starting to write, kind of set the pace for going forward, and I think that's what it's going to end up at.
Yeah, I think for me, well, just kind of a point of clarification, what GSP said, it was kind of in the lead up to the Condit fight. He just said he doesn't like doing media because you're just answering the same questions over and over again. He's like, I just feel like a robot. So, which is understandable. I'm sure everybody feels that way. But now his point is, why am I doing this shit if I'm the champ? And the challenger doesn't have to do it just because he's an asshole. Right. So I think those other things, he can kind of see the value in it because, he's promoting something that he wants to get sold or whatever,
It is true, too, though, because it's the same questions that are asked of all the time of fighters and even Dana White, like when you watch the scrums and stuff. I mean, you can look back at last week's scrum or the last fight scrum, and they're asking the same questions. And that comes down to knowledge, I believe. Just for the journalists, it's the knowledge of knowing the fight game, having years in the fight game, and really know what you're talking about. So you're right now it's so young, you're going to get those repetitive questions because all these people are coming trying to be journalists or are journalists, and they're not looking at other people's work or really listening to what's being said. So they're asking the same question over and over and over, and it's not even really the smart questions. Like, they don't dig deep enough. It's just they're just touching the surface right now.
Yeah, I don't know. And in fairness, I will say this: a lot of the reason why all this stuff is repetitive is because you and I are involved in the process. So if we were at scrums, and if we were at, believe me, trust me, if you put my ass at a scrum with you, it wouldn't be the same old scrum. You can guarantee it. The first scrum that you and I go to, the same old shit ain't gonna get answered. I promise you. But anyway, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But so for me, I think that it's part of the game. I think that finding guys is the way to do it. I think you can draw a direct line, especially if you're Dana White and you're complaining that how much money Nick Diaz is costing you. You just say, all right, Nick, you just paid for those guys to be in Stockton for an extra week because you wanted to fuck around. So that's how much I'm finding. I'm finding how much it costs me to keep these guys in Stockton. Yep. So there you go. I'll just draw a straight line to it and call it a day. All right, up next. Another thing along, and they're saying this is the year of the super fight. It depends on how you look at it. I think GSP Diaz is a super fight. Aldo Pettis is obviously a super fight. It just depends on how you look at it. Now, one of the fights that has been kind of talked about by Uriah Faber is he has an interest in fighting Frankie Edgar, which you and I have talked about in the past. I will take full credit for saying I would love to see Uriah Faber and Frankie Edgar fight one another. No, scratch that. I said Uriah Faber and BJ Penn, which may not happen. I'd love to see that fight. But Uriah Faber and Frankie Edgar, I have a lot of interest in that fight too. How much interest do you have in that fight?
I think that'd be a great fight. I mean, we basically got two of the same people meeting up right in the middle of the octagon. I think it's fabulous. I mean, two guys that don't have bigger hearts than these two, Uriah Faber and Frankie Edgar, then we know it. I mean, these guys, you can't take them out. Fucking look at what Aldo did to Uriah Faber's leg. I mean, he just trashed it, but fucking Faber was just still coming at him and trying to win and implement his game, and he was hurting like hell. Same thing with Frankie Edgar. He's a gamer, man. He's in there. It's just constant. I mean, you can't knock the kid out. You can't take him out, and he just come at you. It's like fucking two Frankensteins just gonna be right in the middle of the ring and gonna come out, and I think it might be one of the best fights. Uh, One of the best fights the UFC might see are those two to get in the ring and just fucking duke it out. It's kind of like the old Mickey uh, and Gotti fights, man. Remember those?
Yeah.
That's exactly what kind of fight that would be right there.
Yeah, I think they're both guys that are in the same place. I don't think that it's weird. I've always thought there should be a UFC senior circuit, which like something along the lines of like when Hendo fought Shogun. Now they were still kind of where they needed to be, but when Chuck fought Vanderlei, they were both kind of on the downswing of their. These guys with Rich fights Vanderlei, and there's these guys that aren't really in the picture anymore. But it's like, wow, if I could have seen these guys fight in their prime, you almost see them fight in their prime because their skills are diminished to an equal level. And then you get these wars where these guys are just like, yeah, we would have wanted to see them 5 years earlier, but we still get a hell of a fight out of the whole deal. So I think that Uriah Faber and Frankie Edgar, despite being two relatively young guys, I mean, Uriah said after his last fight he felt great. He's only 33. He doesn't understand all this retirement talk. I think that him and Frankie Edgar could put a hell of a fight on and keep a good pace. Absolutely. So I would be very interested to see that fight. I still think that I'd like to see Uriah fight BJ Penn, but most people are calling for the demise and ultimate retirement of BJ Penn. So, it's really hard to argue with that. But I think that Uriah Faber and Frankie Edgar would be a hell of a fight. All right, let's get to the next bit of business before we get to the fight preview, which is the Cage Wall fight announcements. There were a few this week. I'm gonna go ahead and read them off to you, and you can tell me if you have any interest in any of these fights. All right, so we got Rafael dos Anjos fighting Evan Dunham in Brazil. Sam Sicilia fighting Maximo Blanco. This is something I actually wanted to bring up while we were on that subject. It's a perfect segue. Uriah Faber has a fight, despite wanting to fight Frankie Edgar. He's going to fight Scott Jurgensen in the Tough 17 finale, which I like a lot, but we'll touch on that here in a sec. Esteban Payan versus Jeremy Stevens. We got John Lineker versus Azamat Gasimov. Gunnar Nelson and Mike Pyle, which Gunnar Nelson's going right back in there. Paulo Thiago versus Lance Benoist. And Sarah McMahon fighting Sheila Gaff. So of those fights, the Uriah Faber Scott Jurgensen one has to be the one that sticks out to you the most, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these two guys are friends. I think they go back all the way back to college. So yeah, it's not going to be a boring fight. Jurgensen brings it all the time, and Faber's the same way as the two gamers getting in there and going to battle it, and especially with the friendship. So I think that's even going to take them up a notch because one doesn't want to get beat by the other from knowing each other. So it's almost like that. If they're that close, and you've seen on Twitter them kind of talking back and forth and let's do it, and complimenting each other. But at the end of the day, it's almost like, all right, if you're that close, you get the little bit of shit talking if you win. You know what I mean? You get to rub it in the face a little bit. So
that's true.
I think it's going to be a great fight.
And they're competitive guys, and this is the sport where, I really wish you could see more teammates fight. I mean, Brian Stann said, and we'll get to him in a sec, I watched the In Focus for Stann and Silva, and Brian Stann was just saying, you have to be a family if you're going to have these guys in your gym, because if you're not a family, then you're just a bunch of athletes competing with each other, and no one grows. There's no growth in that. It's just every day we're coming in, and it's who beats who, and you can't have that. So I understand why they don't fight, but I would like to see it a little bit more because they're having wars in the gyms. As a matter of fact, I listened to Dana White on the Joe Rogan podcast the other day, and he said he watched I can't remember who the guy was, but it was a heavyweight. He actually, he couldn't remember the guy's name either. And so anyway, this heavyweight comes into Floyd Mayweather's gym, starts talking shit to Roger Mayweather. The next thing you know, Roger's just beating the shit out of this guy for like all night. And they're ringing bells, and Roger's like, fuck bells. There are no bells. He's beating the shit. So there's wars. My point is, there's gym wars that are going on that we don't get to be privy of. I mean, there's famous stories about in training how Ken Shamrock and Oleg Taktarov back in the day would go into a room, shut the door, and that was that. They would fight they would fight. They wouldn't train. They would fight. They'd come out bloody as hell, and that's how they got ready for fights. No one got to watch it. It was just two of them. and that's what they did. So I think it's interesting to find out when you get an opportunity to watch guys fight who have a relationship with each other, have a lot of respect, but then circumstances dictate that they would fight one another. I think it makes for some interesting matchups.
Yep.
Okay. Speaking of some interesting matchups, we have some this week. It is UFC on Fuel TV 8. It is coming to us from Japan.
Konnichiwa.
Saitama Super Arena in Saitama, Japan is where the weigh-ins took place, and this thing is ready to jump off. It's right in Pride. I got my Pride shirt on. They're going right back into Pride country. They're bringing Wanderlei Silva with them, who is a Pride legend. They're bringing Brian Stann with them, who was born in Tokyo, Japan, on their base. So they have everybody that you would think you'd want on a Pride type card. So just abstractly from the outset, just tell me what you think about this card. Just looking at it as a whole, in a sense.
It might be the best card on Fuel TV that we've seen so far. Absolutely. I mean, Silva Stann fight. That's just going to be a war. I mean, both of those guys are great. I'm huge fans of both people, and I texted you today that I said Brian Stann is gonna win, but deep down inside, man, I like Wanderlei Silva too. So it's gonna hurt me both ways because I don't know who I really want to root for this weekend. And then on the undercard, man, you got some brawls that are gonna come. Stefan Struve is coming up. That dude is on a 4-fight win streak. He can go up top, down on the mat. It doesn't matter. Hunt is coming in there with him, so that's going to be a brawl. And I mean, Diego Sanchez. That's all I need to say about that name. That's a crazy little fucker. I mean, he'll bring everything in the kitchen sink with him. So I mean, we and then the Japanese fighters, Okami. I mean, we've got some really good headlining fights that are going to be on Fuel, man, and I'm fucking stoked about it because you're right. Back in the day when we were watching Pride and watching that shit together, and it's just like we're coming back home.
Yeah, I agree, and we've talked about it before. I'm a guy that always has been a fan of the UFC. I did like Pride. I always liked UFC better, but I always respected Pride. But for older fans like you and I, the notion that Pride was better than the UFC at one time is a very real thing. There was a time when you felt that maybe Pride was going to buy the UFC and not the other way around. So it's good to see them go back to Japan. I kind of wish that we'll have to get into it maybe in the post-fight show, the legalities of the fact that the UFC spent a shit ton of money on basically just the Pride video library because of all the logistics of actually resurrecting the Pride name and starting fights in Japan again under the Pride banner. It doesn't logistically work for the UFC. It's more of a headache than it's worth. Right. And so, but I will say one thing that I actually want to talk about the flurry, but it makes perfect sense here. So we'll do it before we kind of get into the particulars of the fights. Kenny Florian came out and said that he feels like in regards to the UFC cuts, they're going to start cutting boring fighters. Now, I'm not saying there's boring fighters on this card at all. That's not what my point is. My point is saying is that if we can get this kind of talent on a UFC on Fuel TV card, that concerns me, and that's why they're saying that 100 guys need to be, cut because there's this kind of depth in the roster. So what I'm wondering is, and I want to get your take on this real quick, and then we'll get into the card. Do you think that the UFC is going to become a victim of their own success in the sense that they're going to have to cut so many guys because they've held on to them for so long that they may have another, they may bolster the roster of another fight league just by virtue of them having to get rid of guys for financial purposes?
No, I think ultimately when he said he was 100 deep and under, I mean, I kind of understand that, but it's almost like a ploy to light some fire under some asses, right? Like, and if Kenny coming out, K-Flow coming out and saying, hey, if you're born fire, UFC's going to cut you. I mean, you're seeing through the media. So what does that do to fighters? That kind of amps them up. Well, shit, man, I don't want to get cut from the UFC, so I'm going to have to take up my game a little bit. And even like Dana said in the scrum, those guys coming over from Strikeforce, they're fucking hungry. You know what I mean? And they've been on a pretty good fucking streak of late, those guys coming over. So that's kind of lighting the fire up under their ass too, because listen, if you can fight and you'll be dropping people, or if you even put on exciting fights, you're going to be around. So I think it was almost a ploy to be like, hey, listen, man, we're 100 too many. So if you don't start fucking fighting, we'll drop you because we got plenty of people that will fight and that are exciting. So it doesn't make me no difference because I can see him keeping the 100. If everybody performs like they should, why not keep the 100? Why are you 100 too deep? Because you can give the fucking fans cards like we're seeing the last 3 or 4. I mean, it's always going to be stacked, and then you can get more fights. I mean, who doesn't want to go? The world's worst back when they were kind of thin. We would go to a UFC, and that shit would last like 2 hours through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh man, fucking give me about 4 more hours of this shit. Because I mean, if you're a true fan, I'm there when the doors open, and I leave when they're fucking kicking me out. That's what I want to see. That's what true fans are about. And with these cards, man, you're throwing 11 to 13 fights on the fight card. Fuck, they're 13 fights deep. I mean, you can put that shit on anything. So I mean, I think it is. It's if you're boring, they're probably going to cut you. I don't know if it's going to help any other organization because the fight style, if you're fighting that way, you're probably going to end up fighting that way somewhere else too. So
yeah, well, the other two things that I'd say is this: do you think that realistically, I mean, it's a simple balancing of the books, really. I mean, if they can cover the fighter's salary with the gate, everything else is a bonus.
Right.
Absolutely. So if they cover the fighter's salary with the gate, then now you factor in production costs and all that kind of stuff, but also you got to pay Ariana, you got to pay Joe Rogan. I get all that.
All your overhead. Right.
Yeah, all your overhead, and then also the idea that then whatever advertising you get and whatever you get from Fox for it being on Fuel TV. So that's an interesting part of it too. But the thing that I think that everybody needs to keep an eye on when it comes to Strikeforce guys, and we got to get to this card, so I don't want to get off on too much tangent here. Maybe I'll hit this and finish strong. But the thing they got to keep in mind with the Strikeforce guys is these guys haven't fought regularly, so we really don't know what they can do. If you fight 3 times a year, it's different than if you don't know the next time you're going to fight. So now a guy like Luke Rockhold or Woodley or Marquardt, all these guys are going on like, shit, am I going to fight in November? Do I even know? Like, they've had such crazy situations with their fighting lives that when they fight regularly, that's going to just sharpen their skills even more. Right. So these guys that think that, the Strikeforce was the lesser league, I'm not saying it wasn't, but it might have been lesser because they didn't fight as much. Now they're coming in hungry. They want to stick around, and it might be problems. Okay, anyway, let's get to the main card. The main event of the card is Wanderlei Silva, the Axe Murderer, against Brian, the All-American Stann. Let's go ahead and I'll hit the tail of tape real quick, and then we'll go over the weigh-in results. Wanderlei Silva, I mean, the guy's been fighting forever. He's 34-12-1. He's 5'11", 205 pounds, 74-inch reach. He's an orthodox fighter. He's 36 years old. Brian Stann's 12-5. He's 6'1", 205 pounds, 74-inch reach as well. Orthodox fighter. He's 32. Now, both of these guys are former champions. Wanderlei, of course, held the 185-pound belt in Pride. Stann held the 205-pound belt in WEC. The weigh-in results were Wanderlei came in a pound under the limit, or I'm sorry, a pound under 205, and Stann came in a pound over 205. So give me your thoughts on this fight, and then I'll give you mine, which I have some pretty substantial thoughts about this because of our history with this. Go ahead.
As of late, I mean, with this fight, I mean, we all know Wanderlei Silva's he said he doesn't want to retire. He's not talking about that. But, I mean, with some of the fights, him getting knocked out, he's kind of on the downside, and I'm a firm believer. Once you get knocked out once, and cold cock knocked out, you change a little bit. And with Brian Stann, man, he has some heavy hands, and he's a knockout artist because he has power in both. Not just one hand, man. This kid has power in both hands. So I think it's going to be a stand-up brawl. I think it's going to be a fight through and through. But I think Brian Stann is just too much for Silva at this stage in Silva's life and in his fight life. So I think he's just too much for him.
He very well may be, and he looks like he's got a good camp going. To some of the stuff I watched, he feels a little more, he feels a little more at home. He's living in Atlanta. He's training with a bunch of guys he likes. So that's good. And I heard something recently on Twitter, or maybe I read an article. Somebody said this guy's chin is chipped. And I like that. I hadn't heard that before. I wish I could give the guy credit. I need to start writing this down because I always mention stuff on these podcasts, and I wish I could give credit. And that may be what the situation is with Wanderlei Silva. Once that chin gets chipped, it's a lot easier to break it. So yep. I think that here's what I want, and I should save this for Finish Strong, but I'll go ahead and say it now. and there's an article coming to Cage Wall specifically about this. I think that Vanderlei Silva owes it to the fans of Japan to give them one more big night where he just goes out on his sword like the old days and just, I mean, listen, you're going to get your money's worth with the Vanderlei Silva fight. I'm not saying he's going to go in there and not swing for the fences. That's what he does. That's the kind of fighter he is. He's going to go in there. He's going out on his sword. That's just who Vanderlei Silva is. But I think that, you know, if the MMA gods smile upon him tomorrow night and he has the good fortune of beating Brian Stann, and he's a heavy underdog, I think he should hang him up right then and there. A lot of guys, they don't know when to retire. There's no better way to go out if you're Vanderlei Silva than knocking a guy out in Japan and just hanging him up. So for me, that's what I'd like to see. And again, I'm gonna expound more on that in our article that I'm writing for Cage Wall right now. But I don't know if he still has it in the tank, man. But you know, if he can pull to quote someone who I'm not a huge fan of, but is a very prolific country singer. You know, maybe Vanderlei Silva might not be as good as he once was, but he can be as good as once as he ever was. And maybe hopefully tomorrow night he can put one on Brian Stann's chin he's not ready for, and one last time hear the roar of that Japanese crowd. And that's the crowd that made him who he is. And
Right.
And he deserves, I think, that if he has the good fortune to win with a knockout, I almost want to see Vanderlei Silva soccer kick Brian Stann, get disqualified, just go out Pride style and just soccer kick him, you know, lose by DQ and just go out, you know, with the fans going ape shit. Throw the hands up, you know, and have the goddamn streamers fall. We'll bring the broad in there from the old days, and she can announce him as the winner, you know. So I don't know, man. That's what I want, and it's hard sometimes.
You know, that's I'm gonna have to go. I'm gonna step up on here. I think that's a great storybook ending. I think that would be classic. It would be great. But with any fighter or any athlete, when you have success at what you're doing, that makes you think you can still do it, right? So if he does by chance knock out Brian Stann, or even beat him in a great fashion, he will want to continue to fight because he is that kind of person.
Oh, absolutely. And Vanderlei Silva is the textbook example of that. I mean, just looking down his record, you know, it starts to look like the end, even in Pride. So his last two fights in Pride, he lost to Krokop with a head kick and Henderson with punches. Then he comes over to the UFC. We get the long-awaited fight with Chuck Liddell, UFC 79. Great fight of the year. Okay, lost the decision to Liddell that a lot of people argue with. So then you're figuring, all right, that's 3 in a row, 2 in Pride and 1 in the UFC. They throw him in there with Keith Jardine, knocks him out. All right, so now we're thinking we're going to get some traction here. Fights Rampage, who he destroyed in Pride, gets destroyed by Rampage. Fights Rich Franklin, loses the decision. Again, another great fight. So then you're starting to feel like, all right, it's the beginning of the end again. Fights Michael Bisping and wins. Then, in what I think should have been the end of his career, again, it's tough to go out on a loss. He lost to Chris Leben. Okay, round number 1 in 27 seconds. That should never happen. A guy of Vanderlei Silva's caliber should never lose to Chris Leben. But then he tries to come back, beats Kung Lee, knocks him out, knees and punches. All right, then he fights Franklin again and loses. So, you know, it's like you said. I mean, if he looks great against Brian Stann, here we go again. He thinks that it's time to resurrect his career, and he's going to go on another run. And I mean, I think right now is the end. You know, right now he honestly has no business being in there with Brian Stann. But if he should win, I think that's the time to call it, right?
Yeah, I think so too. I mean,
you're in Japan.
Yeah, you're in Japan. Like you said, let the streamers fall, and you walk out fucking on top. But I mean, again, that storybook, and I don't know if he would allow that to happen.
And he probably won't. And so I'm pulling for Vanderlei. I think, you know, me, you, and Vegas all probably feel like Stan's going to win. But, you know, I'm pulling for Vanderlei. I don't really feel like there's a story to write with Brian Stann. As a matter of fact, for all his heroism in his history, he's not really that much of an interesting guy to me. I think he's an okay fighter. He's kind of you know.
And I've liked him. I've liked him since I started watching him come up through the WEC. So, I mean, he was one of my favorites when that was on, and I liked him in that. And I just, to me, I'm opposite of you. I think he's a very interesting guy, and I think he doesn't show a lot of emotion, and that's because of his background and what he did. And I think there's more underneath it. Nobody's been able to crack it, and that's what keeps him driving. So he's kind of that different individual, which I think has probably a lot to learn. I think you're probably a very intelligent person, but we don't get to see that side because he's the Marine, he's straightforward, or what I mean, Army, Marine, that type of special forces type of guy that's just fucking deadlocked, and you're not gonna break me.
Yeah, you're right. That's what my problem is. He's an analyst. I'm not crazy about him as an analyst. Again, I want to take nothing away from what the guy's done in his history. He's got won this, got the Silver Star. He's a legit hero in every sense of the word. But hopefully in this main event we'll see one of those old school Vanderlei stare downs, middle of the ring, and he's not going to scare Brian Stann. That's for damn sure. Sonnen said it best before he fought Brian Stann. He said Brian Stann's not scared of me. He's not scared of 10 of me. And I can guarantee you that Brian Stann's not afraid of Vanderlei Silva. It's funny, I watched the Vanderlei Silva highlights earlier. A fresh-faced Dan Henderson was pissing his pants when Vanderlei Silva was staring him down in the middle of that Pride ring. He didn't want a goddamn thing to do with Vanderlei Silva. But this ain't that Vanderlei Silva. So, we'll see. Again, I want Vanderlei to win, but I'm thinking that the more likely outcome is that Brian Stann's going to win. All right, up next. Speaking of Vanderlei Silva. Vanderlei went on about as impressive as a run as you can go on in Pride. It was a 6-year run where he was destroying everybody, and that run was stopped by Mark Hunt. So another Pride guy who, really, Mark Hunt is kind of an enigma, man. He came over to the UFC. He was kind of just fulfilling, the UFC was just fulfilling a contractual obligation they had with Mark Hunt from his Pride days, and now here he is fighting Stefan Struve. If he takes him out, he can be, right back in there. Because Mark Hunt was the guy that everybody thought could have beat Fedor in Pride. So he becomes a really interesting guy. He's small for a heavyweight. He's kind of got a little Pat Barry to him, but he goes in there. He's a big Samoan, and he goes in there to drop people. So this is a really, really intriguing fight. What do you think about this fight and how it's going to play out?
Well, I just want to add that too, because Struve said if he wins, he wants a title shot. I mean, and rightfully so. He's been on a 4-fight win streak, and he's knocked people out. He submitted people. I mean, his game's good. When you look at him, he just doesn't look, even though he's tall and he's got the tied for the longest reach, and he just doesn't look like a heavyweight just because of the way he looks. He's tall. He doesn't carry that much weight out. It's his body frame. So when he's asking, if he wins, how can you argue with the kid? But going into this fight, it's you have a shorter, stockier Mark Hunt that's gonna lay your ass out if you drop your hands against Stefan Struve, who has a reach and is gonna keep it at bay and can keep the distance, and he's been, he's a winner. So when this fight comes to pass, I think Struve will probably be the one that wins this fight. Just probably, if I'm guessing, it's probably going to be off the ground as well too.
All right, and again, it's very interesting to talk about these guys in terms of a tape, because 25-5 for Stefan Struve. He's 7 feet tall, and that's the thing. He's just a little bit too tall for MMA circles and MMA fans, because he's kind of a freak show at 7 foot. I mean, you see a guy like Gustafsson. Gustafsson's a tall guy, but he's just tall enough where he's a tall fighter, but Struve is just out there. So he weighs 251. He's 83 inches is his reach. He's an orthodox fighter. He's 25. Mark Hunt, 8'7". He's 5'10", 265 pounds, 74-inch reach. There's a 11-inch reach disadvantage.
There you go, mathematician.
I know. I almost dropped it. 11-inch reach disadvantage for
say that
Hunt.
Again. 11 inches, man.
That's crazy.
That's for in fucking the fight game. That's a big advantage.
And then 38 is Mark Hunt's age. Now, what's interesting about these two is that in their last 5 fights, Struve's beat Miocic, Johnson, Herman, Pat Barry, and then lost to Travis Brown. So what makes this fight interesting to me is that he's fought Pat Barry, so he's pretty much fought this guy before. Pat Barry has better leg kicks than Mark Hunt does. Mark Hunt can go in there and really throw some hands. So does fighting Pat Barry help or hurt Stephen Struve, or does it have no effect?
It helps him because you're right. I mean, Pat Barry. Well, Mark Hunt has better stand up than Pat Barry in his hands. I mean, that's a given. Uh, but the rest of them is pretty much just like a Pat Barry. So it's going to help him come out because you know what that weight's going to feel like. You know he's going to be throwing punches and probably some kicks at you. So you know how it's going to play out. But in the long run, it's just going to be like anything else. It's that reach, man. That reach in the arms and those legs.
All right, and just to correct myself, it's okay. So let's do this. Math was never my strong suit because I feel like I'm confused about something that's not all that confusing. All right, 83-inch reach for Stefan Struve, 74-inch reach for Mark Hunt. That's 9 inches. What am I talking about with 11? It's 9 inches. Let me get my head out of my ass. And so either way, it's a substantial reach advantage. But I don't know what I was doing. It was a foot, and then it was a whole thing where I just got I got confused. But then I broke out. I got a Texas Instrument. I got a Texas Instruments calculator over here, and I got it figured out. I Googled the difference, and it told me that. So anyway,
thank God for Google.
Thank whoever the hell invented Google for Google. So anyway, moving forward, who do you like? You like Struve, right?
Yeah, I think Struve. I'm gonna have to say that these two guys get on the floor, and I think Struve with just his long limbs. I'm gonna go with the submission on this one with Struve off of some takedowns that Hunt's gonna carry, and then Struve's just gonna turn it around on him. Might see a rear naked, you might see a triangle, something like that, but it's gonna be it.
I'm gonna go ahead and take Mark Hunt, and I don't know why. I mean, I think I think that I don't know, man. For me, I don't really know what it is about Stefan Struve. I just look at him and I don't feel like he's ever destined to fight for the belt. And maybe he's a freak show like Roy Nelson on some level, and no matter what he does, they're never gonna give him a shot. I mean, Roy Nelson has all but earned a title shot.
Dude, you're too much in the box. That's what's your problem. You like to think inside the box. You like everything to be black and white when it comes to fighting.
I do. You're right. Absolutely. So anyway, I think that Mark Hunt's going to take this one based on, I don't know, man. I just feel like it's his destiny. So I don't know. That's some deep shit that I just laid down there. But I think, I don't know. Not his destiny, motherfucker. I think that he's just, I don't feel like.
You're gonna fucking some Jedi mind tricks and shit? And
no, I think that.
With the lightsaber and give it to him if he fucking wins and tell him he's the chosen one?
What I think that Stefan Struve is underestimating Mark Hunt. I think that he's going to pay for it. I think that he thinks that it's a foregone conclusion he's going to beat Mark Hunt, and I don't think he is. I think that he's bitten off a little more than he could chew. Struve. All right, up next is going to be Takanori Gomi.
I am your father, Mark.
Versus Diego Sanchez. So, first bit of business here is that Diego Sanchez did not make weight. He came in heavy, 158. He had to forfeit 20% of his purse for that. And,
did he really?
Yeah.
I haven't even watched it. Listen, I was busy tonight doing some other stuff and some sports stuff, and I haven't watched the weigh-ins yet. So when you're coming to me with this, it's kind of breaking news because I wanted to watch him later. So that son of a bitch came in heavy.
Yeah, so he's losing 20% of his purse. So anyway, let's hit the
wow.
Let's hit the tail of the tape for Sanchez and Gomi.
Does it matter?
That's funny. They're calling it. It's funny now. They're calling it a catchweight fight because he couldn't make it, which I guess you have to do. Anyway, Takanori Gomi's been around forever. 34-8. He's 5'8", 155 pounds, 70-inch reach. He's southpaw and he's 34. Diego Sanchez, 23-5, 5'10", 155 pounds. Or 158, however, depends on what your scale is. 72-inch reach, he's southpaw as well, and then 31 years old. So,
no more disrespect than it is to come to Japan and be overweight. That's no excuse. No excuse, especially for Diego Sanchez. We're talking about a guy that I thought had his life back on track and looked great he's always looked good in his fights, and I mean there was a way he was started to party and even talks about that, and he lost his mind a little bit, but he looked like he was back on the track, and him coming up overweight is just fucking disrespectful. I don't even want to talk about this fight anymore. Honestly, with that, that tells me one thing, that he's not focused for this fight, and that Gomi probably is going to run right through him.
Really, well, the other issue is too that he kind of likes to jump weight a little bit. He's been at 170. He's been at 155. Fought BJ at 155. Last fight against Ellenberger was at 170. So I don't know if it's just switching weight classes that maybe caused a problem for him. I do agree that coming in heavy is disrespectful to fighters. This fight is really intriguing to me because Diego said too that the clock's ticking on his career. It's certainly ticking for Takanori Gomi, who once upon a time was one of, if not the best 155-pounders in the world, and now it seems like those days are just distant memory. So, are these guys right at the right place in their careers to really put on a hell of a fight, or are we looking at some Lyoto Machida, Dan Henderson fool's gold?
No, man. Before you told me that, I'm going back to this weight. I can't fucking shake it off my mind. It's like a goddamn one-night stand that you'll fucking remember forever, right? I can't get it off my mind because I thought this might be the fight of the night on the card. I thought this had every makings to be just a fucking brawl. Diego likes to push it up against the cage, dirty box, and take you down and fucking ground the pound. Gomi is just a fucking brawler. He can take you down too and do the ground pound. So it was like a battle of wills of who was going to pull that over. And now I'm not so much sure of that. Sanchez coming to 158. So is he really focused? Is his mind in the right place? Gomi's fighting fucking Japan, fucking legend of legends in this place. So I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and call it now. I'm gonna say Gomi could get the knockout or the night, or even I won't say it's the fight of the night because I've kind of lost a little bit of confidence in Sanchez now.
Yeah, I don't know. The thing that you're right, the 158 scares me a little bit, but I think
that's 3 pounds, dog. That's 3 fucking 3 pounds don't sound like when you're losing weight. You say, "Oh, you lost 3 pounds." Okay, you lost 3 pounds. That's great. It's not a big feat, but 3 fights in a fucking weight class, like dropping weight 3 pounds is a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, well, yeah, considering that all the weight that you probably had to drop to get you to 3 pounds from, you know what I'm saying? Like he was probably heavier than he should have been when he even started his weight cut. So I don't know. My dilemma here is that despite the fact that Diego Sanchez usually shows up to put on hella fights, I mean his record is littered with decisions. He decisioned with Ellenberger, decision with Campman. He decision with Paul Thiago. So to me, my question is, decision with John Hathaway. I guess my question is, does that mean that he's just not going in there and able to finish, or does it mean that he's just not? He can't be finished. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe he's just a durable guy, so he's going in there. Like when you think of Diego Sanchez, I mean, 158 or 155, is he going to bring it, or is this really scary?
It's kind of scary to me. I don't know. I mean, usually, yes, he usually brings it, but I've never seen him miss weight. I mean, we've seen him get in the party scene. We've seen him come, even when he was partying and probably doing who knows what, when he was doing that, he still brought his fucking fight game. But you've never seen him go heavy or anything like that. It just, when people are heavy, that's like a mental thing to me. When you come in heavy for a fight, that means mentally you're not ready because mentally you couldn't get to that point to drop enough weight to make weight for the fight. So that's a mental thing. I mean, yeah, it has to do with nutrition a little bit like that, but mentally you weren't focused enough to do that. So that gives me a worry because let's face it, what it is. Diego Sanchez isn't some fucking average guy who's walking down the street. He's already kind of on a little bit out there on the, I won't say mental because that's might be a little mean, but he is kind of mental. You never know what's with this kid, what's on his mind. He says some crazy shit, and his beliefs is just a little bit different from people's. So him not making 158 worries me.
Yeah, I mean, and you could be a crazy son of a bitch when at least your head's right for the fight game, and that was the case. I mean, he was on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. Dana has historically had a special place in his heart for guys that were on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, giving them probably more chances than they deserve. But, all that punching and sand bullshit and all that craziness that he's done, I mean, he came to that damn MMA awards show fucking blasted. He was drunk as shit. So, he was up there giving an award or getting one, and I was like, what the fuck is this guy doing? Like, he was up there talking, presenting an award, and the whole crowd was laughing their ass off at this guy. He was so drunk. So, and even then he was making weight. So to tell me now you're not making weight, now granted it was a different weight class, and it may be easier to make 170 than 155, but you're right. I mean, he's heavy, and when he rehydrates, he's going to be heavy.
Oh.
So now you're in your head, you're not, maybe 3 pounds over turns into 5 pounds over when you rehydrate. So
Yep.
now in your head too, like you said, I can't remember who the announcer was, whether it was for boxing or MMA. You might know who this guy is. There was a guy that used to, when he would announce, not Jimmy Lennon Jr. and it's not obviously not Bruce Buffer. It was a Latino guy. He used to say when he announced somebody, he goes, and coming in at a fit and ready 135 pounds. You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name, but I know exactly who you're talking about.
I want to say it's Joe Ferraro, and he has a radio show, Showdown Joe. I want to say it's him, but that's neither here nor there. But Diego Sanchez isn't coming in at a fit and ready 155 pounds. He's coming in at an unfit and unready 158 pounds. So that, like you said, that's concerning, man. That's on his mind. You got your hands full enough with the Fireball Kid when you're on weight.
Yeah.
To not be on weight, problematic.
Yep.
So you're gonna go ahead and take Gomi based on just Diego. You feeling like Diego's not ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll let go of that. It's in Japan, and again, Gomi, his career is winding down, and he, it's a nice little feather in your cap to take out a guy like Diego Sanchez. Not easy to take out, and I think that Gomi's probably more ready than Sanchez is, and we'll see where it goes. All right, so we're gonna get to the next fight, which interestingly enough is the fourth fight from the top. Really a great fight. I think that it may be in the 4 spot, or we'll call it the 4 hole, because of people are really scared it's gonna be a boring fight. Hector Lombard versus Yushin Okami. No strangers to boring fights. So let me go ahead and I'll run down the tail of the tape and then we'll get to business here. Now, they've both come out and said they are concerned at what the fallout would be from them having a boring fight. So for Yushin Thunder Okami is 28'7", 6'2", 185 pounds, 73-inch reach. He's a southpaw. He's 31 years old. Hector Lightning Lombard, it's 32-3, 1 draw. He's 5'9", 185 pounds, 71-inch reach. He's a southpaw as well, 35 years of age. So just because Hector Lombard's been in Bellator, we haven't seen too much of him. We think he's some spring chicken. I can tell you, as being a 35-year-old myself, you're no damn spring chicken when you're 35. So how do you see
it? Yeah, this has the makings to be a ground fight that people are going to think that are boring. Because Okami, Okami's been working. He's been on his wrestling game. His last fight was as wrestling. He's worked with Chael Sonnen. He's really upped to that game in there. And Lombard is the same way. He can go to the ground and try to take you out on that one. So ultimately, it could be a little dirty boxing against the cage, trying to do the takedowns. If you do takedowns, they're just going to be wrestling for position, kind of throwing some elbows here and there. So it could very much end up looking like a boring fight, just because of the way Okami wants to move in, or even Lombard. But if you get him standing up, I mean, if I'm guessing, Okami wants to take this to the ground because Lombard has some hands on him if he engages. We saw him in the first fight coming over the UFC, and he was just fucking starstruck and just didn't even show up. I mean, he looked like he didn't even want to get hit. But he has heavy hands. I mean, we've seen it in Bellator. We've seen it. He was on a huge win fight streak. So, but if I'm guessing, Okami's going to work for the takedowns and try it, and it's probably not going to be the most exciting one. But then again, if Lombard catches him once, it could be a good night.
Yeah, and let's not forget, too, that we kind of are giving Hector Lombard the benefit of the doubt because of his past. Now, if you look at his last 4 fights, lost to Akihiro Gono, lost to Musashi, lost to Boch, and then now all of a sudden we think that he's back on track because he beat Rusmar Palhares.
Yeah.
Palhares is a legit guy. I mean, don't get me wrong, but he's not. I don't know that he's a top 10 guy. I don't know that he's, he's not somebody that your career is necessarily back on track because you defeat him. Right. In terms of just strength of opponents, Yushin's beat Nate Marquardt. Lost to Boach as well. Lost to Anderson Silva, which, again, no shame in that. Defeated Roberts and defeated Alan Belcher. So he's definitely got a more impressive rearview mirror than does Hector Lombard. But I don't know, man. I think Yushin Okami usually wins the fights he's supposed to, and Hector Lombard doesn't. So I like Yushin here. I hate that I like Yushin here because there's not a long tail on the kite of Yushin Okami in terms of what moving forward brings you. He's already fought Anderson. He's really not an exciting fighter necessarily. He's a solid guy. He's rare for what he is. He's a wrestling Asian. You don't see too many of those. So he does it well, but he's not really exciting. So he's a guy who might be looking at getting cut as well if he doesn't start to get more exciting. If both these guys go to decision, they might be one of the hunt. Go ahead.
It has to be exciting if it does.
I agree. Okay, so we both have Yushin, so let's go ahead and move on to the other fight of interest on the main card, which is CR the Great Bahadurzada versus John Young Stun Gun Kim. See, I could be an announcer. So, okay, who do you like here? CR the Great is a hell of a striker. Stun Gun's obviously Stun Gun, so where do you see this fight going? And I'll talk more to the tail tape after you.
Stun Gun, I think it's going to be a great fight. I think it's going to be stand-up. Stun Gun, was on a roll there for a while, and then and then he got caught by I believe it was Condit, right? You ended up pretty quickly. But I think the guy has a world of talent, and being back in Japan, I think it's going to be too much. It's that excitement, that rush. It's going to really get you pumped up for a fight. And the way he's been fighting, even with that little hiccup, I think he's on his way to move up the ladder.
Well, if you look at their last fight, they have a common opponent, Paul Tiago. They both beat him.
Yeah.
But Stun Gun's only lost to Maya and Condit. He beat Nate Diaz, beat Pearson, and then of course beat Paul Tiago. So he's 16-2 on his career. 6'1", 170 pounds, 76-inch reach. He's southpaw. He's 31 years of age. CR the Great is 21-4, 5'11", 170 pounds, 72-inch reach. Orthodox fighter, and he's 28. So they really match up well together. But
what's the Great's last fights?
All they're showing here is Paul Tiago. But give me a sec, I can research him further because I think that at Fight Metrics they just do the UFC. I think they're in the pocket pretty much. So for CR, he is, like I said, 21-4. He's beat Paul Tiago, Tommy Dupre, John Alessio, Derek Noble, Carlos Pereira, Robert Jocks. Nobody really that jumps out to you in his past. He lost to Jorge Santiago once upon a time, lost to Evangelista Santos once upon a time. So, but recently, he's been taking guys out. That's one thing I will say. His last 5 fights, they've all ended in the first or second round by TKO or KO. So, the guy's got heavy hands. He's going in there to take folks out.
Yeah, I think he's got heavy hands, but I think Stun Gun's just going to be too much for him because I think for the Great, it's gonna be an upgrade in talent that's facing this weekend, and we'll see how he handles it. But he's walking in on somebody else's turf, so that kind of bends you backwards a little bit. So I'm gonna go with the Stun Gun.
I don't know. I get a feeling that CR the Great's on the rise, so I'm gonna go with him. I think that he I don't know if he has a run in him, but I think if you look at Stun Gun, he's done what he was meant to do in MMA. He's kind of hit his ceiling, and I don't know if CR has yet. So I'm gonna go with him. All right, so let's go ahead and let me just get your final thoughts on this card. Is there anything else on either the main or prelim card that interests you? It seems like it's just a bunch of. We get to see Bruce Leroy fight, so that's always interesting. So,
yeah.
Other than that, is there anything on the card you're looking at?
No. It's going to be an interesting card. So some of these younger guys, when I say younger guys, I mean younger in the UFC. Are they going to make statements? I think it's a great card. So we'll wait and see. But I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, I'm excited too, and I think maybe one of the sleeper fights. When you look at the prelim cards, what I always looked at when I look at a prelim card is like, what's going to be the fight? Now, this isn't a pay-per-view, but what's going to be the fight they show when a fight, some of the fights go early and they got to fill space? What's going to be the fight they pull up? And it could be Ricky Fukuda and Brad Tavares. That's a really interesting fight.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, that could be one of them. So, yeah, like I said, the whole card stacked, and and when I say stacked, it's going to be some great fights coming up, and they've already done a couple. They're going to do a couple more fights in Japan, so they're putting heavy. Joe Silva's doing his work, putting some heavy cards on this fuel card, and in Japan. So the next couple rounds when they come there, it's going to probably be the same because they're building almost like that pride back up, but with the UFC brand. So it's going to be good.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that we're really in an interesting time right now with UFC right before, like you said, there's going to be blood on the dance floor for sure, and the 100 could be a real thing, or it could be just a motivational tool. Maybe it's 50. I tend to think that I believe this, and again, we've talked about my conspiracy theories at length in the past, but I think that Joe Silva has a big board somewhere. He's got all his fighters, and he matches guys up in dream scenarios and all that. And I think that when it comes to cuts, I personally believe that Joe Silva's not going to cut guys that he thinks a fight could be made outside of the UFC they never made inside the UFC. That if it's I honestly don't think that he would ever cut Fitch and Koscheck, because that's a fight that's never been made. Me and the Fitch and Koscheck shit. I don't know why I'm so preoccupied with that goddamn fight. It'll probably never happen. But if you cut Fitch and Koscheck, next thing you know, they're fighting in World Series of Fighting, and that's going to draw some eyes. So if you're the UFC, you have to kind of make moves and say, well, we're going to cut a bunch of heavyweights that don't have a lot of cachet, and welterweights and guys that couldn't potentially end up fighting one another.
Yep.
All right, so on the heels of that, I'm going to go ahead and finish strong, and then we'll get to yours. My finish strong is this. If Jose Aldo wants to move up to 155 and fight Ben Henderson, or Pettis wants to move up to 155, or go down to 145 and fight Jose Aldo, if Ben Henderson wants to go to 170 and fight GSP, if Anderson Silva wants to go to 205 and fight John Jones, let's let it happen, man. This is the golden era of MMA. We don't know what the future holds. We thought once upon a time we were going to get Brock Lesnar and Fedor Emelianenko. We never got that. We thought we were going to get Fedor Emelianenko and Randy Couture. We never got that. There's a lot of fights, Josh Koscheck and John Fitch aside, a lot of dream matchups that we all thought that we were going to get that just never came to fruition. It's the old saying, all but the best laid plans of mice and men. Everybody thought we were going to get Dos Santos and Overeem. We almost didn't get it, and now we're going to get it. So, who ultimately are these dream matchups that we feel like we almost didn't get GSP and Diaz? All these things always get upset by injuries or these things that happen. So I would tell Dana White, if these guys want to fight each other, you're kind of half-heartedly telling me this is the year of the super fight. Let's let it happen. If Uriah Faber wants to fight Frankie Edgar, if BJ Penn wants to come back and fight Frankie Edgar, or he's already fought Frankie Edgar, but if he wants to come back and fight Uriah Faber, if Faber wants to come up to 145 and BJ wants to go down, I want to see as many great fights as we can, because this is the golden era. I mean, I know that guys are coming up, the Rory McDonalds of the world, but we're now at a point where the early day fighters are still kind of hanging on. And, it could make for some madness. We could get Matt Hughes against Royce Gracie at UFC 60, where Royce just was no match. He got held down, crucifixed, and just punched in the face. And you're like, Jesus, Royce, why'd I have to see that fight? It makes for some interesting matchups where maybe we could be disappointed in some of these. But I say let's let them happen, man. Let's let this be the year of the super fight. Let these guys fight who want to fight, and let's have some stories to be told and some books to be written about, really the golden era of the UFC. All right, go ahead. You're up. Finish strong.
Tomorrow night on Saturday, we're going to see a legend walk into a ring. And now I think we should praise him as a legend. We should see him as a legend. But is the legend going to fight? That is the question. And I'm talking to Wanderlei Silva. We want to see him come out as a knockout and go out in Japan as a winner in fashion. But I don't think that we should underestimate him tomorrow night. I think he is a true champion. I think he's going to raise his game up a little bit, and I hope we do see that Wanderlei Silva that we saw in Pride that were killing people. On that backside of that, if he is not, we should still praise him as a champion and as one of the greatest of all time. Tomorrow night we'll see it. For your sake, I hope we can write it in the storybook and sign it off. But for all means necessary, I would like to see the confetti fall down tomorrow night.
I agree. I think it'd be a fitting end to a hell of a career. And before we shut it down, let me ask you one more thing while we're finishing strong and talking about Wanderlei Silva. What do you do with a guy like Wanderlei Silva in terms of the UFC Hall of Fame?
Oh, that's instant, man.
But he didn't. But the point is, he didn't do anything in the UFC worth shit. It's all pride. He's an MMA Hall of Famer, but he's not a UFC Hall of Famer.
I see your point, but there's no other organization that's putting these people in the Hall of Fame. So when people like Wanderlei Silva puts that much forth to establish the MMA fight game as a whole across the world, it's hard not to put him in the UFC Hall of Fame. I mean, people knew him when he was come over, when he was excited. I mean, I don't know how you felt, but when you knew he was coming to the UFC, I mean, it was fucking like Christmas in July. And I mean, he has such a name that's known worldwide in MMA that I would think, out of respect to the guy and what he's done, that they would put him in the Hall of Fame.
Well, I agree, and I think that maybe the simple answer to that would be it's time for the UFC to really put some more time and effort into their Hall of Fame, and make it, instead of just making it at the training center, it needs to be a freestanding building in Las Vegas. And I think they need to have a Pride wing, they need to have a WEC wing, they need to have a Strikeforce wing. I think that makes sense. All people they bought out,
Dream, or even Dream and.
Well, they have to do. Oh, they can only really do entities that they own. You know what I'm saying?
I think they should. I should think they should. I think they should think. Fucking getting tired, TJ. I think they should do an MMA Hall of Fame, not just that. I think it needs to be an MMA Hall of Fame, and UFC, as big as they are, they need to be the ones to create it. I mean, because listen, the Gracies. Not all the Gracies fought in UFC. Sakuraba. I mean, we're talking about fucking legends that need to be in some kind of Hall of Fame, and somebody needs to start that Hall of Fame. And what better than the UFC to do that in Vegas? I mean,
yeah, I agree. I think it's true. I think that you could do. I think they own enough entities about the history of MMA. At this point they could probably get away with just calling it the MMA Hall of Fame, putting in only the things that they hold the rights to. I mean, you can't do Dream. You just can't. They don't own the rights to it. So I would say that if you walked into the MMA Hall of Fame and literally, like, there's a wing that's the Pride wing. Could you imagine you walk into, dude, somebody needs to steal this. Dana White, you need to watch this podcast because this will make you $1 billion. Open an MMA Hall of Fame in Vegas. Could you imagine walking into the Pride wing and all you hear is the Pride music playing? Dun, dun, dun. Like, how crazy would that be? And then, like, a bunch of flat screens, they're showing fights.
Yep.
You know what I mean? How crazy would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see it. I mean, I want to go one step further. I want a whole MMA. I mean, you can do with the entities you own, you can do your wings, but make it as an MMA as a whole, because there's a lot of great fighters that a lot of people don't know here that have fucking really put a stamp on MMA. So, I mean, I don't know, man. It's got to be done. Let's fucking do it. Because if you do it by committee, if you do it that you get a certain amount of people to bring these Hall of Famers in, then it doesn't have to be by the entities that you own. That's
true. Yeah. So I mean, I think we need to get cracking on that. And listen, man, there's some guys that are so it's fucked up what I'm about to say, but I'll say it. There's some guys, man, that have managed their finances so poorly and are such a mess. You could probably have them working at the motherfucker. You know, you could be like, you go into the UFC MMA Hall of Fame and there's I'm gonna drop a name. Fuck it. There's Rico Rodriguez or Mark Kerr, standing there ripping your ticket. I think that would make it interesting, instead of like having wax figures, you just got a guy standing there legit, just a real guy. Okay, so these guys got to get paid somehow. How crazy would it be? You go to the UFC Hall of Fame, and in there's just two guys fighting.
I was gonna
like,
say
every day they just have fights in the middle of the day.
Or how about this? They need some money, so it's like the Daytona 500. You can drive the cars around the fucking deal. You pay and get fucking 5 minutes with an old fighter.
That'd be, oh my god! Now we're getting somewhere. Now we're getting somewhere. Could you imagine that? You pay your $5 for
for 30 seconds
for Frank Trigg to let you rear naked choke him. That would be the best, man. That would be awesome.
Oh,
for Mark Kerr to knee you in the forehead. That'd be awesome, man. You get your damn egg scrambled by Mark Kerr for $5.
Yeah,
seems fair.
I like it.
I think we've made a lot of progress here. This might be the best finish strong ever. What are we doing? Dana White needs to watch this podcast and put us on the payroll, man. Could you imagine if he put me and you in charge of the MMA Hall of Fame? Jesus Christ.
It'd be like a goddamn circus. We'd have more people come through that thing than the goddamn Mayflower.
Could you imagine me and you in charge of the MMA Hall of Fame, and then you walk in the MMA Hall of Fame, and there's me and you podcasting in the back? How nuts would that be? Podcasting from the MMA Hall of Fame? Oh, Jesus, Dana. Yep. Dana, there's $1 billion waiting to be made.
God damn it.
Make it happen.
Just take one of your winnings from one night on the fucking poker table.
Yeah, no kidding. Did you hear about that? Did I text you that about how he's said he lost $1 million and won $6 million?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Just give me a piece of that.
That's it, man. Just a little piece of the pie. I don't want the whole pie. Just give me a slice. Yeah. All right, so listen. Let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. Coming up, we got a lot of things planned. We want to do a Ronda Rousey special. We want to start to delve further into the history of the MMA. I got some things I'm trying to work out in terms of the history of the UFC, bringing some people on from certain eras. We're gonna try and make it happen. Participants and the good Lord willing, we'll be able to make those things happen. We're gonna reach out to everybody we can on Twitter. I got a lot of things knocking around in this brain of mine that I want to make happen. We're gonna make it happen. But the one thing I can tell you for sure that's coming up next is going to be the post-fight show, where hopefully we'll celebrate the career of Wanderlei Silva and discuss his retirement. So, as always, enjoy the fights. This is John Franklin for TJ Craig saying, keep your chin down and your hands up. This is the Hot Cage Podcast.